Hi guys, today we are going to find out, what if the California gold rush failed? You're standing beside the American River on January 24th, 1848, watching James Marshall crouch by the water's edge. The morning sun glints off something metallic in the stream bed, and your heart races with anticipation. Marshall's calloused fingers close around the shiny flakes, but as he bites down, they crumble like dried leaves. "Fool's gold," he mutters, tossing the worthless pyrite back into the rushing water. You witness the moment that never sparked a revolution. No excited shouts, no frantic letters to newspapers. The sawmill construction continues in silence, just another day of ordinary labor in Mexican California. Word never spreads because there's nothing worth spreading, and you probably won't survive what comes next. Without gold fever to drive them, Eastern families stay put in their familiar towns and cities. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below with your location and local time. I love seeing where this alternate journey takes us. You're about to discover how one failed discovery reshapes an entire continent's destiny. The ripple effects of this non-event will touch every corner of American society. Now sit back and let's dive into today's alternate journey together. You watch as spring turns to summer in 1848, and the eastern seaboard remains crowded with dreamers who never dream of California. Ships that should be packed with fortune seekers instead carry normal cargo between familiar ports. The docks of New York and Boston bustle with routine commerce, not frantic gold rush preparations. Farm families in Iowa and Missouri plant their crops as usual, never abandoning their plows for pickaxes. You see fathers staying home instead of kissing wives goodbye for years-long California adventures. Children grow up with both parents present, their families intact, and their futures predictably local. The population of America's eastern cities swells beyond capacity as no great migration provides relief. Tenements pack tighter with immigrants who have nowhere else to go, no golden frontier beckoning. You witness unemployment rising in industrial centers as too many workers compete for too few jobs. Crime rates spike in overcrowded neighborhoods where hope has nowhere to expand westward. Political tensions simmer as resources stretch thin among the concentrated masses. Meanwhile, letters from California describe endless monotony instead of instant riches and wild adventures. The myth of American opportunity feels increasingly hollow to those trapped in urban poverty. You realize how that single failed discovery keeps 300,000 souls anchored to familiar but struggling ground. You stand on the dusty plaza of Los Angeles in 1850, watching Mexican officials conduct business as usual. California remains a distant, sparsely populated territory under Mexico's weakening grip. Not the bustling American state it never became. The Bear Flag Republic never rises because there aren't enough American settlers to demand independence. Mexican governance continues its slow decline, corruption festering without American pressure for reform. You witness how the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo plays out differently when California holds no strategic value. Without gold-driven American settlement, Mexico retains nominal control over this sleepy coastal region. The few American traders and missionaries scattered across California live quietly under Mexican law. You see how indigenous Californios maintain their ranch lifestyle without massive disruption from fortune seekers. The mission system continues its gradual decay, neither revitalized by boom nor completely abandoned. Mexican soldiers patrol half-heartedly, their government unable to properly fund or supply distant California. You observe how international interest in California remains minimal without its golden reputation. European powers barely glance toward this economically insignificant territory on the Pacific Rim. The port of San Francisco handles only modest trade, never becoming the crucial gateway it might have been. You realize how political weakness creates a power vacuum that will eventually invite outside intervention. You walk through the Sacramento Valley in 1852, and the silence is profound. No hydraulic mining tears apart mountainsides. Native American tribes continue their seasonal migrations without dodging bullets or fleeing genocidal miners. The Miwok people still gather acorns in ancient groves that were never clear-cut for mining camps. You witness Yokuts villages thriving along riverbanks that never became polluted with mercury and mining debris. Traditional hunting grounds remain undisturbed, supporting indigenous communities that history would have otherwise destroyed. Children grow up learning ancestral languages that survive without the cultural devastation gold fever brought. You see how tribal councils meet in peace, their territories intact, and their sovereignty unchallenged. The population of native Californians hovers around 150,000 instead of plummeting to 30,000 through disease and violence. Sacred sites remain sacred, unmarked by mining claims or settler graves. You observe how traditional trade networks between tribes continue functioning without outside disruption. The complex relationships between different indigenous groups evolve naturally rather than being shattered by external pressure. Seasonal ceremonies proceed undisturbed, maintaining spiritual connections to land that stays in indigenous hands. You realize this alternate California represents one of history's great prevented tragedies. The ecological balance remains largely intact, without massive environmental destruction from mining operations. You stand where San Francisco should be in 1855, but instead find only the sleepy village of Yerba Buena. A few dozen adobe buildings cluster around the muddy cove, housing maybe 500 souls instead of 50,000. The natural harbor sits mostly empty except for occasional trading vessels carrying hides and tallow. You walk dirt paths that should be bustling streets filled with banks, hotels, and gambling halls. No grand mansions crown the hills because no mining fortunes built them from Sierra Nevada gold. The few saloons serve local rancheros and sailors, not desperate 49ers drowning sorrows or celebrating strikes. You observe how Yerba Buena's modest economy revolves around cattle ranching and modest Pacific trade. Chinese merchants never arrive in waves because no gold rush creates demand for their services. The famous cable cars never get invented because San Francisco's steep hills carry no urgency of rapid growth. You see how the bay remains pristine without massive development pressure from sudden population explosions. Local Ohlone people still fish these waters without competing against industrial-scale operations. The fog rolls in peacefully over undeveloped headlands, where millionaires' estates never rise. You realize this tiny coastal settlement represents California's alternate destiny: quiet, overlooked, and economically insignificant. Ships bypass this unremarkable port for more profitable destinations down the Pacific coast. You stand in the boardrooms of railroad companies in 1860, watching ambitious dreams crumble into dust. The Transcontinental Railroad project dies in committee meetings as investors pull funding without California's promised wealth. Central Pacific Railroad never breaks ground because there's no golden destination to justify the enormous expense. You witness how the Union Pacific struggles to find purpose in connecting to an economically barren Pacific coast. Congress refuses to subsidize a railroad to nowhere, leaving the Continental Divide unbridged by steel. Theodore Judah's surveying expeditions through the Sierra Nevada become footnotes rather than foundational achievements. You observe how the Chinese workforce that should build through mountain passes never gets recruited. Thousands of Irish and Chinese laborers remain in their original communities instead of dying in railroad construction. The famous photograph of the Golden Spike ceremony never happens because there's no railroad to complete. You see how America remains fractured by geography, with the West truly isolated from Eastern markets. Overland travel stays dangerous and slow, discouraging further westward expansion for decades. The Pony Express continues operating much longer without railroad competition putting it out of business. You realize how transportation infrastructure shapes national unity, and without it, America stays regionally divided. Western territories develop their own distinct economies separate from Eastern industrial centers. You survey the American frontier in 1865, and the famous cry of "Manifest Destiny" echoes hollowly across empty plains. Without gold fever driving westward momentum, the ideology of coast-to-coast expansion loses its compelling urgency. Politicians still preach about America's divine right to continental dominance, but few citizens feel motivated to risk everything. You watch how Oregon Territory struggles with minimal population, its fertile valleys remaining largely unsettled. The Mormon pioneers in Utah find themselves truly isolated without waves of California-bound travelers passing through. Texas remains the westernmost significant American settlement, its influence ending at the desert's edge. You observe how Mexican territories like Arizona and New Mexico stay firmly under foreign control. The Gadsden Purchase never happens because America sees no value in southwestern desert lands. Native American tribes across the Great Plains face less pressure as fewer wagon trains cross their territories. You see how the buffalo herds remain larger, supporting indigenous communities that avoid devastating conflicts. The U.S. military maintains fewer frontier posts without constant settler-native conflicts demanding intervention. Westward expansion crawls at a snail's pace, taking decades longer to reach what should be inevitable destinations. You realize how one failed discovery in California creates a domino effect across the entire continental vision. America's sense of national purpose falters without the golden prize validating its expansionist dreams. You stand in Abraham Lincoln's War Room in 1862, watching how the Civil War unfolds without California's crucial support. The Union Treasury struggles desperately without the $2 billion in gold that never flowed east from Sierra Nevada mines. You observe how Confederate forces gain momentum as Northern resources stretch dangerously thin across multiple fronts. California's 32 electoral votes never secured Lincoln's presidency, potentially changing the entire political landscape before war began. The Pacific Railroad Acts die in Congress without California's economic justification for transcontinental connections. You witness how the Union Navy lacks California's strategic Pacific ports for global maritime operations. Confederate agents operate more freely on the West Coast without overwhelming Union civilian populations to counter them. The war drags longer as the North cannot leverage California's industrial capacity and mineral wealth. You see how recruitment suffers without California's eager volunteers swelling Union ranks by the thousands. International recognition of the Confederacy becomes more likely as Union weakness becomes apparent to European observers. The Emancipation Proclamation faces greater domestic resistance without California's progressive political influence, strengthening Lincoln's position. You realize how financial resources shape military outcomes, and without gold, Union victory becomes far less certain. Alternative scenarios emerge where the war ends in stalemate or Southern independence becomes reality. The fate of American slavery hangs more precariously without California's anti-slavery voice in national politics. You gaze across the Pacific from Mexico's retained California coastline in 1870, watching how regional power dynamics shift dramatically. Mexico maintains its grip on the entire Pacific seaboard from Baja to the Oregon border, controlling crucial maritime access. The port of Acapulco becomes Mexico's primary Pacific gateway instead of sharing influence with American San Francisco. You observe how this geographic advantage attracts European investment that historically flowed to American California. French and British merchants established trading posts along Mexico's extended coastline, bypassing American territories entirely. The Mexican Navy, though modest, controls strategic choke points that American ships must navigate carefully. You see how Japan's opening to the West in 1854 benefits Mexico more than the United States. Trade routes between Asia and the Americas favor Mexican ports over the non-existent American Pacific infrastructure. Mexico's coffee, silver, and agricultural exports gain direct Pacific access without American competition. You witness how this retained territory gives Mexico negotiating leverage in future territorial disputes. The Monroe Doctrine faces new challenges as European powers establish stronger Pacific footholds through Mexican partnerships. California's natural resources, timber, fertile valleys, fisheries, remain under Mexican sovereignty and development control. You realize how geography determines geopolitical influence, and Mexico's Pacific coastline becomes its greatest strategic asset. American dreams of Pacific dominance fade as Mexico consolidates control over the Western Ocean's eastern shore. You step into modern-day America in 2025, and the differences from our timeline feel staggering and surreal. The United States ends at the Rocky Mountains, with California remaining a sparsely populated Mexican state. Silicon Valley never exists. Instead, you find sleepy ranches where tech giants should dominate global innovation. Hollywood never becomes the entertainment capital because Los Angeles stays a dusty pueblo of a few thousand souls. You observe how America's population concentrates heavily in the East, creating different urban dynamics and political pressures. The Pacific Rim economic boom of the late 20th century largely bypasses the United States entirely. China's rise to superpower status faces less American competition without California's economic and technological might. You see how Mexican California becomes a quiet backwater, never developing the universities or industries that drive progress. American culture lacks the laid-back, innovative spirit that historically emerged from California's unique social experiment. The environmental movement develops differently without California's early leadership in conservation and green technology. You witness how global climate change discussions proceed without America's most progressive and populous state participating. The tech revolution happens elsewhere, perhaps in New York, Boston, or even in other countries entirely. American politics tilts more conservative without California's 54 electoral votes consistently supporting liberal candidates. You realize this alternate America represents a fundamentally different nation, smaller, more traditional, and less globally influential. As you return from this journey through an America that never quite became America, the weight of one moment's significance settles heavily. A few worthless flakes of fool's gold in James Marshall's palm changed the trajectory of an entire continent. Without that glittering discovery, 300,000 dreamers stayed home, Native tribes survived, and Mexico retained half its coastline. The transcontinental railroad remained a fantasy. The Civil War dragged longer, and manifest destiny stumbled at the desert's edge. You've witnessed how single events create cascading consequences that reshape nations, cultures, and the very meaning of progress. This alternate America, more concentrated, more traditional, less influential, reminds us how contingent our familiar world really is. History turns on such small hinges, and the California Gold Rush represents one of the most consequential hinges ever. In our timeline, that golden discovery built an empire, destroyed cultures, and launched America toward global dominance. In this timeline, its absence created a quieter, smaller, fundamentally different nation altogether. So here's my question for you. Which version of America would you rather call home? The one driven by golden dreams, or the one that never learned to dream in gold?